All right, welcome to the final lecture portion of the CompTIA PenTest Plus training series. This is going to be the last section of Module 5, and as you can tell, we're going to be talking about cleanup and restoration, which is pretty much after everything has been all said and done. You've done all your exercises, you've done all the damage and all that stuff. You need to get everything back to working order and remove all traces of you doing whatever it is that you just did. And a part of this will also be reporting, really, when you think about it. However, there are mechanisms that we have to actually cover that will, for example, as it says right here, remove persistence, secure data destruction, etc. So I'm going to go through this slide officially, but up until this point, we have gone through 4.5, I should say, maybe like 5 full modules. And the very first one was the rules of the engagement. Module 2 was all about reconnaissance, enumeration. Module 3 was about vulnerability analysis and finding the various vulnerabilities attached to the machines and the networks that you found in the recon portion. And then Module 4, we talked about the exploits, and it was the biggest module that we went through because there are so many different types of attack vectors and exploits that you can use to attack any given network or system or even human being, right? And finally, in Module 5, we talked about post-exploitation. So the things that you would do after you got into the network, after you got into the building, after you got into a system. What do you do after that? How do you elevate your privileges? How do you move laterally to get to the other machines inside of that network, etc.? And at the very end of Module 5, which is where we are right now, we're going to be talking about the wrap-up, basically. This is what you do to clean up the messes that you created and restore all of the systems back to their original order. And after this specific video, the very next one is going to be just exam preparation, just to kind of give you some best practices for the exam. And then after that, we're going to go through all of the lab exercises, and we're going to use Metasploit and Metasploitable, which is the victim version of Metasploit. We're going to use a variety of different tools that you will most likely see in the examination. And if you don't even want to take the examination, at the very least, the things that you need to really know and get good at so that you can be an official, efficient, proficient, legitimate pen tester. So, as all of that being said, section 5.4 here. After an attack or pen test, cleanup and restoration are critical steps to remove traces, eliminate persistence mechanisms, and restore the system to its original secure state. If these steps are not executed properly, remnants of malicious activity can lead to future compromise, forensic detection, or operational disruptions. And think about it in the real world exercise. Okay, so this is in the perspective of, okay, you're doing a pen test, somebody hired you to do this, so you just want to make sure everything is back to working order and everything like that. If, let's say, it's not something that you were hired as a penetration tester to do, right? Let's say it's something that you actually want to do against an enemy of a state or something. You got hired by the government and they are hiring you to do a hack against one of their enemies, right? So when you do something like that, what happens in this portion is you want to remove all of the traces of you being in those systems, of you being in those networks. Any remnants, right? Any literally breadcrumbs or traces, any kind of evidence of your activity can lead to future compromise, which in a pen testing world, in an enterprise, you being hired as a pen tester, that's kind of an issue. But if you're doing it in a real world against the enemy, that's not really an issue. That's actually something that you do want to do. This is an issue when you're in the real world. You don't want to be detected and you don't want to be found during a forensic investigation. And then operational disruption, again, applies to practice exercises, pen tests, and things like that. So operational disruptions, you don't want to happen in a pen test. Future compromise, vulnerabilities like leaving backdoors open for a malicious attacker to get into the company, you don't want to leave stuff like that. However, forensic detection is something that is really important in the real world when you're doing an actual hack or attack against the enemy of your country or the enemy that you hired, or etc. You know what I mean? Or that you were hired to attack, I should say. So what we're going to be talking about are these specific tactics: removing persistence mechanisms, securing data destruction and log manipulation, and restoring original configurations and system integrity. And this all applies to both practice as well as real world type hacks that take place. You want to do all of these things unless you still need to get back into their network or their system for whatever reason. So you would want to maintain persistence. But assuming that you're done, assuming that you got the job done, the goal was achieved, you stole the data you needed to steal, or you planted the malware, whatever it is, you want to do all of these things so that you delete all traces of yourself so they can't track it back to you, or at the very least, they have the lowest possibility and probability of tracking it back to you. So that's basically what we're going to be talking about in this particular video, and it should be a relatively short and sweet video because all of the heavy duty stuff is what we talked about earlier, and for the most part, I mean, you kind of understand exactly what we are going to be talking about. The headline is really the big thing. There have been several videos that I've developed on this channel with command line tools that we used that actually do clean up, but it's kind of like a part of the function of the tool itself, where after you run the exploit, specifically it was on the security engineering path where we were doing purple teaming, where it's like the blue team and the red team come together and we do threat emulation, and we want to try to do essentially the path that an attacker would take. We would do it and then find what the vulnerabilities are, what hacks actually took place, and then after we've deployed those attacks, we want to clean up after ourselves. And there are certain tools that actually do that for you. And if I remember correctly, I think it was Kappa was one of the tools that we used, that it had like a command line version where you would deploy the attack, and then after that you would run the version where it does the cleanup. I may stand corrected. I'm terribly sorry. There's literally dozens and dozens of tools inside of my mind, so I might be thinking about the wrong one, but I feel like it is Kappa. Anyways, so there are a lot of tools that you can actually use that will do automated cleanup on your behalf. But at the very least, you should know what exactly needs to be cleaned up, so you can kind of piece by piece go down the checklist and make sure every piece of your activity, every remnant of your activity is deleted and cleaned up. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video, and a quick little sponsor promo from Hackaholics Anonymous and how you can get access to these lecture documents and the practice questions and the scripts that we're going to create at the end and all of those extra things, how you can get those through Hackaholics Anonymous, and then we're going to get into the content. To get the PenTest Plus notes, practice questions, and to join a supportive community of like-minded people like you, consider joining the Hackaholics Anonymous membership community. We have 4 tiers: the supporter, the agent, the guardian, and the master. And each tier gets their own Discord server and early access to content. The agent, guardian, and master levels will get exclusive content like line-by-line code explanations for how to create cybersecurity and PenTest Plus scripts, like exclusive downloads that they will get. For example, the notes document for this PenTest Plus and everything that I'm using for the lectures, as well as all of the practice questions and everything else that will go along that will be made for the scripts and everything else that we're going to be doing for the PenTest Plus training series. There will be free pre-made monthly Python automations that have to do with system administration, cybersecurity defense, as well as, of course, PenTest Plus and ethical hacking. And then there's going to be monthly live streams with me every single month, plus so many other things that you would get as a part of being a member of Hackaholics Anonymous in these tiers. To join, you can simply click the link in the description below, or you can go to our homepage and click the join button there, or you can go to youtube.com/@HankHacksHackers/join, and you'll be able to join Hackaholics Anonymous. Now, without further ado, let us continue with PenTest Plus. Removing persistence mechanism. So why is persistence removal important? And before I read through any of this stuff, think about it. Why is persistence removal important? Especially from the context of a penetration test. Okay, don't think about necessarily why persistence is important in a real life hack, because maybe you want to persist, maybe you want to be there. But from the context of a pen test, why do you think removing your persistence mechanisms and the backdoors that you created and all these things, why do you think those things are important? I'll give you a couple of seconds. Okay, so if persistence mechanisms are not removed, attackers or pen testers can regain access even after remediation. So even after it's solved, after it's been patched and fixed, if the persistence mechanism has not been removed. For example, you created a new user, the new user has access as an admin, and they remediated the original vector that you were able to exploit to get into the system and create that user. So nobody else can come in and recreate users, but your user that you created is still there. And that's technically a persistence mechanism. You could always re-log in as that user, or if somebody gets access to that user information, they can re-log in and gain access as an admin because you gave that user admin privileges and you added them to the admin group. So things like this, right? So even after the actual vulnerability that was exploited has been remediated, so even after the weakness or the chink in the armor has been filled in, if all of that is done, somebody can still take advantage of that persistence mechanism, and they can actually still get into the system, into the network. So attackers will use scheduled tasks that we talked about already, registry keys, which we talked about, backdoors, which we talked about, and malicious services, just to name a few. And they can maintain control of the system that they originally hacked into or the network that they're in. And this all falls under persistence. So we need to remove the scheduled task, remove the script that was attached to the scheduled task or the executable that's been installed in the machine. We need to remove the registry keys or the modifications, the configurations that we did in the registry keys. We need to remove the backdoors and the malicious services. We got to do all of those things, which is why documentation is so important, because as you are doing your exploits, as you're actually achieving success and moving laterally and doing all of the extra things that you're doing, you need to notate every single step that you're taking, because when it comes down to actually removing persistence, you got to go through all of the things that you did that were successful and remove all of them and make sure you reverse them, remove them, mitigate them, whatever it is, right? So this is why it's so important. The simple fact that even after the original vulnerability has been remediated, attackers or pen testers can actually still regain access through any of these avenues and then some. This is just a handful of the things that can be used to get back into the system and maintain persistence. So again, I'm just going to breeze through all of this because we've talked about this in depth in previous videos, but these are just common persistence mechanisms that you need to remove. A scheduled task, for example. You created a scheduled task and it was called whatever, the malicious task or whatever you called it. So you do scheduled tasks, delete task name, malicious task, and then fully, right? You go ahead and remove that whole thing, or if it's a file or a folder, I think, whatever. But this is the command to remove a scheduled task, to delete a scheduled task. If you created a registry key, you would do reg delete. Instead of reg add, you would do reg delete, and then this would be the path to the thing that, or I think this is the full path right here. That's the full path to what you created, and then you're going to remove whatever it was called, which is the backdoor. Again, just remove the entire thing. Services, so sc delete and then the name of the service that you previously created. Let's say you created a script that's in the startup folder. You need to delete that, and very simple delete command. And these are all specific to Windows environments, but it doesn't mean that you don't do the same thing if you did it in a Linux. It would just use the syntax that would be for bash, or you just go and find that item and then you delete it and delete all traces of it. However you want to do it, you just got to make sure that you do it. WMIC, right? Event subscription. This kind of like, this is a table that we're in and this got pressed in, but WMI event subscription, which executes scripts automatically. So you want to use WMIC, and then you have this whole piece right here, and the path is going to be that, and then you're going to delete it, right? Alternate data streams, hides data in NTFS files, so stream executable, and then just get rid of it. This is the path to the report itself. So you would do -D, I believe, which is for delete using the streams executable. And anytime that you see anything like this, if you see commands like this and everything that we just talked about in the previous portion, if you see anything like that, just realize and recognize that this is a part of cleanup. They are deleting their traces that they have left inside of the system. Number one, either because they don't want to be detected, or number two, because it's a part of cleanup and restoration to make sure that the environment that they went into is just the way that it was after they leave, right? And then once that's been taking place, you hand your report in, and then you say, listen, I deleted all traces of myself, but these are all the things that I was able to do. So you need to account for all of this. You need to go ahead and resolve, remediate, mitigate all of these things that I was able to do, so that somebody like me who has my skill set and knows all these things doesn't do it maliciously. They don't do it with evil intentions. I did it because I'm trying to point out your Achilles heel. But if somebody else can pull this off, then they'll go ahead and take you for everything you got. So make sure that, I was able to create this thing, so make sure that nobody else can do it. I was able to create this, and then make sure that nobody else can do it, etc., etc., etc. So let's go through some of these motions. So let's say that you want to remove scheduled tasks on either Windows or Linux. Doesn't really matter. First, you want to list all the scheduled tasks on Windows. So you would do the query list, right? And use it in verbose so you get as much details as possible, and then try to find the malicious scheduled tasks. And in my humble opinion, you should not be doing this even. Anytime that you create a scheduled task that was used to do whatever it is that you did, you need to notate that, so that you know that when you're in the cleanup phase, you just go and delete the task that you created. You shouldn't have to query a list of scheduled tasks to try to identify a malicious scheduled task. This is something that you can use to do that, should you need to do it. However, if you're just deleting your own traces of all of the things that you have done, you should have a list of all of those things. And if you made a scheduled task, you can just go ahead and delete the one that you made. If you want to remove a malicious scheduled task on Windows, you would do sh tasks delete, and then that's the name of the task, which is basically the command that we just talked about. So this command right here is to list it on Windows. This command right here is to delete the one that you identified as being a malicious task on Windows, right? If you want to do it on Linux, it's the cron tables, and then you would do -L to display all of the user's cron jobs, and then to remove whatever it is, you would just do cron tables -R, and it'll clear all these scheduled cron jobs for that specific user. So again, it just happened. If you've created one, you need to notate it, and then when you're doing recovery and the wipe and all of that stuff, where we are right here, you need to just go ahead and delete all the things that you actually made. You shouldn't have to. I mean, I guess the thing is, like, I really my standard for all of this is document everything as you're going. It should never get to the point where you're like, oh, did I do that? Like, I forgot. Maybe I did do it, or maybe I didn't do it. Okay, let me go check the list of all the things that exist. Oh, you know what? I did do that. That should never happen. If you want to be a professional at this game, you need to have extensive documentation every step of the way. So anything that you do, write it down, make a little note on, I don't know, a notepad, or on the notepad file itself, the software that's available on a computer, or like if you just want like a physical notepad next to you, or Post-its, or whatever it is, however you want to do it. Just do it real quick and be like, oh, gotta delete this, gotta delete. Like, all of those things you need to document, so that you shouldn't have to second guess when it comes to the restoration and the deleting of all of your traces. You shouldn't have to go through an entire investigation to delete all those things. That's just my humble opinion on this. The mitigations against scheduled task persistence would be to monitor task creation logs, which is for event ID 4698 in Windows Event Viewer, and restrict cron job editing to administrators. And again, we talked about this when we were actually doing the video on these types of attacks and everything that can be done for persistence and lateral movement and all that stuff. So we talked about all these things. It's just that it's kind of like a review of what you need to do to erase your traces of scheduled task creation. For example, let's say you want to remove malicious services that were created. So list the running services on Windows, again, this is one of those things where it's like you shouldn't have to list them. You should just know exactly what you created if you chose a malicious service or if you created a malicious service. But if you wanted to list all the running services, you would do the get service commandlet, where the object's display name is something like malicious. Now, in a real world, and if you're smart as a pen tester, you would never name your service something that has malicious in it. It would sound legitimate. The name that you would choose would be super legitimate. So this is silly. This is kind of just saying that, yeah, whatever the placeholder for this would be the name that you assign to your thing. And or you would go look at the list of the most we were talking about lol bins, right? See the living off the land binaries that we were talking about in a previous video, where you use all of the binaries that are actually legitimate binaries on a given system. You just use them maliciously. So you would go through the list of those lol bins and then find the ones that will most likely be used maliciously, and then go through all the services maybe that have to do with that specific software or that binary. Maybe that's how you track this thing down if you're trying to list the running services. But if you were the person who created the malicious service, you need to delete the thing that you created. You should not have to list the running services. I'm just saying, this is what the documentation is telling us to do and whatever, but I'm telling you, if you really want to be good at this game, you need to document everything that you're doing. I'm probably like beating a dead horse, but I feel like it's better to say it too much than not say it enough, right? So if you did something, document what you did so that when you are going through restoration, you will delete every single thing that you did. There should be no second guessing. You should not have to do research to see what has been created. You can stop and delete the malicious Windows service. So let's say you've identified whatever it is. You just do sc stop and then sc delete, because you can't do delete without the service being stopped first. So first you stop it and then next you delete it. This is how you would list these services on a Linux machine. Again, you should not have to list them. You should know exactly what you made. However, you can list all of the units that have to be, they're a service type of unit. And so you'll identify any of the rogue services, and then the way that you would delete them would be to call on system control, systemctl, disable the service, and then go ahead and remove the path to that actual service. So you just remove that whole piece right there and you delete it. And then I would also like delete the delete folder, right? Like just remove everything that has to do anything with it, so it can't even be restored at any point. The mitigations against malicious services: to monitor for unauthorized service creation on Windows, and to restrict admin rights to service management altogether on any kind of machine, Linux, Windows, whatever it is. On Linux or Unix, we would be talking about the sudoers list, or people who are potentially root users. On Windows, we're talking about administrative users or admins, administrators. So those are the people that can create services, and those are the accounts that can create services. So the creation of services and the management of services should only be reserved for the highest level users. And this is what I was just talking about. Simply deleting a file does not erase it. It remains recoverable unless it's been overwritten. So if you want to securely delete something, you would use something like, on Windows at least, you would use something like sdelete executable, and then you would give it the path to that thing, and it'll overwrite the file 3 times to prevent recovery. So it'll overwrite the file once, then overwrite it again, and then so it'll overwrite once, and then it will overwrite on that overwritten copy another time, and then it'll overwrite on those copies another time. And so it's almost damn near impossible. I'm not going to say fully impossible, but like super, super, super difficult to recover that specific file. And if you wanted to do, 5 rewrites or overwrites, then you would do P5, right? And really just make it really, really difficult to do unless somebody had a quantum computer or something like this. Securely deleting something on Linux would be to shred it. And then you would go ahead and give it the path with all of these options, which overwrites the data 5 times before deletion, right? So this is what makes you a really good penetration tester, and this is how you delete all traces of what you have done, so that nobody else can abuse it. So if somebody breaks into that system, or if somebody who's an employee of the company that has malicious intentions wants to use the thing that you just did to break into their systems, they can't, right? So even if they have the ability to retrieve the deleted file for whatever reason, they should not be able to restore this file that would allow them to do whatever it is that you did, right? So you want to securely overwrite the file and then get rid of the file. Just in case it does get recovered, it still won't be able to be used. The mitigations against data recovery would be to use full disk encryption. So for example, BitLocker or Lux, I call it Lux, to protect sensitive files. So essentially you have encryption of the sensitive files, the most sensitive files. So even if somebody broke into the computer, they won't be able to access these sensitive files because those files have now been encrypted. And unless you have the decryption key, which is usually a very complex password or something, and maybe even multi-factor authentication or whatever it is, unless you have access to those decryption mechanisms, they won't be able to access those sensitive files. And then configuring the automated log rotation and expiration policies. So again, automated what? Log rotation and expiration policies. Logs can actually be rotated, meaning that whatever is being written to one log file, once it moves to the next one, and once it moves to the next one, ultimately the previous ones get either expired or automatically just deleted, rotated out of the roster, we should say. Like, so the older logs get rotated out of the roster. Let's say you have a maximum of 5 logs that you maintain. You've gotten 5 logs. Now there's a 6th log file being created. The very first log file is going to be rotated out, meaning it's going to be automatically deleted. It is now expired and it can't be accessed. So data recovery, right? So mitigations against data recovery. So if somebody wanted to get access to some of those sensitive activities that was taking place, and it was just something that was legitimate in your system, it's just that the information in those logs can be sensitive and it could be something that somebody could abuse. And if that's the case, you want to make sure they are destroyed. And this is part of data loss prevention. It's a part of just data retention in general, where you have data retention policies and it applies to your logs. And after 3 iterations, after 5 iterations, it automatically expires and it gets deleted. After 3 years of retention, they automatically get expired and they get deleted. So whatever the data retention policy is within your company, you want to make sure that you actually enforce that and configure for those things to be done automatically. Now, this one specifically has to do with the security system and application logs, which are some of the more commonly used logs or commonly updated logs as a pen tester does what they do. So the security logs are obviously going to be updated, or they'll have new events in them, I should say. So security logs will have new events in them that track the activities that you just deployed as you went through your pen test. So you want to clear that log. You want to clear the system log that would have traces of what you did inside of that system. You want to create the application log that would have traces of the various applications that you used and the way that you used them. So these are the ways that you clear your traces, right? It says clearing system logs, but really essentially what you're doing is you're deleting all of the breadcrumbs that you may have left behind. Any hints or remnants of you being in these systems, you delete all of them by clearing these logs. Now, there is another log item that comes up always when you actually clear a log. And I don't know what the event number is, but it has shown up so many times during a pen test, where whenever you clear the log, a new log item comes up. It's like the very first item on the new series of events inside of the log. And the very first item says event logs were cleared, right? Security logs were cleared. So it still leaves some kind of a trace as to, oh, somebody wiped the logs for whatever reason, but you can't find out what all of the previous activities were, so you can't really know what they did. But it is a hint that somebody was here and they just deleted everything that was inside of these logs. So that's always very, very interesting. And it's a really cool defensive mechanism. It's a really cool security mechanism that at the very least gives some kind of a hint that hey, somebody was just here and they deleted all the logs. So no idea what they did, but they deleted their traces, they wiped their traces. So you need to go ahead and do a full investigation on this machine. That's basically what that one line item says. It doesn't say all of that verbatim, but when you see a line item that the logs were cleared, you should be on high alert. You should be like, why were the logs cleared? I didn't clear them. Nobody in our company has been assigned to clear them. Everybody knows not to clear them, basically. So if the logs have been cleared, something happened, and you start the investigation. Clearing the bash command history, or literally any command history on either Linux or Windows, is also a very important thing to do, because when you interact with the terminal, it saves a list of all of the previous commands that you have entered. And it does it for really for convenience, because a lot of times if we type a very long command that does a specific thing for us, and all we need to do is just modify one specific or one piece of that long command, we can just press up on the arrow keys and it'll bring the entire command for us. And when you do that, when you press up, it is referring to the history of all of the commands. So when you delete all of that history, then any type or any command that you typed into the terminal will get deleted, which means that, you know, as a malicious actor or as a pen tester, if you're trying to delete your previous history, delete all the traces of you being in that terminal, this is one of the key things that you have to do. This is like a very basic but very, very powerful thing that you have to do. And this would be one of those things that I would also just put at the top of my list of things to delete, right? Before I start creating any kind of payload or doing any other, you know, malicious services or doing scheduled tasks, whatever it is, at the very top of the list would be clear terminal history. And then if you successfully create a service, okay, all right, you know, delete this service. If you do a scheduled task, delete this scheduled task. It would be like that. But at the very top of the list of all of the things to delete, it would be the terminal history. And so for Linux, it would be using this command. And then syslog entries in Linux can also be deleted as such. So if you do dev null is a folder that is empty, like there's nothing that exists in it, and then if you send anything to it, it automatically gets deleted or replaced, I think with I think it gets replaced with like just a bunch of zeros or whatever it is. So when you do cat dev null and then you put it into the syslog, what you're doing is you're replacing everything that's inside of syslog with the contents of dev null, which is nothingness. It's just a bunch of nothing that's going to go into the syslog, and it's going to replace everything that's inside of syslog with a whole bunch of nothing. So the mitigations against log manipulation would be to enable remote logging to prevent local deletion. Very, very cool little tactic and very handy. So if somebody deletes the systems locally, right, and you have that one last item that says system logs were deleted, then you're like, let me go see what the remote logs actually show. Because all of the logs that have been created on a specific system can actually be remotely backed up on some kind of a external server. So very, very handy little strategy. That's actually very cool little strategy. And then using immutable log storage. So for example, SIM solutions or worm devices. SIM solutions, by their nature, they collect a bunch of logs, right? So let's say Splunk will collect the authentication logs, it'll collect network logs, it'll collect security logs, and then it'll do it with a bunch of different endpoints too. So it'll be from, let's say there are 100 computers. Each computer has its own application log, authentication log, system log, security log. All of those things will come into Splunk. Splunk will ingest all of those logs. It will normalize the logs, so it'll extract various line items or elements from each line item, and then it'll normalize it, turn it into data that you can actually search for as you're searching through Splunk. And all of this is stored inside of the Splunk server, because Splunk needs to be housed on a manager server, so everything gets forwarded to it. And in that specific environment, even if somebody deletes all of the logs from any one of those 100 computers, the traces of all of that activity is still going to be on the Splunk server. So this is why it's considered to be an immutable log storage. So long as somebody does not get access to the server that houses the Splunk instance, in that particular case, your company is pretty solid. But if they do get access to the Splunk server, then they can technically just wipe everything that's on the Splunk server, as well as everything else that they did, which is it's the sign of a very advanced hacker. If they are able to do something like that, that means they really know what they're doing. But if you're doing it for a pen test, you would not be doing that. You would not go into their Splunk server and delete everything into the Splunk server. If anything, if you were able to get into the Splunk server, you would delete all traces of you and everything that you did. However, in this type of an environment for a pen test, you don't do that because you want them to be able to backtrack all of your activities, right? You want them to be able to see everything that you did in addition to the report that you provide to them. So you've deleted your trace of everything that you've done, right? You have wiped logs or wiped histories, etc. And you may have done a variety of other things that have affected the system. So in addition to wiping the traces of your activities, you need to actually restore the system's original configurations. Now, one of the key things that I would recommend doing is before you start any pen test, have a backup of the entire environment. So of the network devices, of the configurations of each individual device that you're going to hack into, have a backup of all of those things pre-pen test so that you can easily just go ahead and restore everything to that backup. So it will essentially, by default, it'll just wipe everything that you've done up until that point. And after you've done whatever the pen test is or whatever, you can just restore it to the day of the pen test where everything started. Before you actually started the activity, it'll just go to that point in the system. So that's one of the easiest ways to restore the configurations of any given system. The manual ways, if you want to go piece by piece, you can reset configurations, for example, by resetting the firewall rules. So reset Windows firewall rules can be done with netsh advanced firewall reset, which restores the firewall policies to its default settings. You can restore default user permissions on Linux by doing change mode. So chmod is change mode. And then you are going to set it to the 755 permission, which is the main user, the root user, or the owner, I should say. The owner will have read, write, and execute permissions. Everybody else will have only read and execute permissions if that's what you want them to do. If you want them to have these types of permissions. Refer to numeric permissions on Linux just so you can understand what these values mean. But basically, a read permission is a value of 4, a write permission is a value of 2, and an execute permission is a value of 1. So if somebody has a value of 7, or a given group has a value of 7, that means they can read, write, and execute. If they have a value of 5, that means they can read and then they can execute, because write would have a value of 2, so it would not count. If it was 766, that would mean that they had the second two numbers, they have read and write, but they don't have execute, because execute has a value of 1. If it was 733, that means they have write and execute, but they can't read, which is kind of retarded. Like it's a redundant, or not redundant. It's a weird permission to set, I should say. Excuse me, I don't mean to offend anybody. Just in case you're listening to this, my apologies. But it's like a silly, stupid way of setting permissions, is to give them, they can't read it, but they can write to it and they can execute. That's kind of silly. Then you have the path that you want to change the permissions of. Or if you do I believe the -R would be recursive, where you give the entire contents of this entire folder, you would give it these permissions. And finally, on Windows systems, you can actually repair or rebuild the compromised registry keys by using the SFC tool and scan now, which is basically, it'll scan everything, and whatever has been corrupted or poisoned or broken or destroyed, whatever it is, use your favorite adjective in that case, whatever has been modified in any way that needs to be restored to its original state, it can be done so using SFC. So it'll scan and repair corrupted system files. So mitigations against configuration tampering would be to use baseline configuration monitoring. So group policies or CIS benchmarks, which really, so a baseline again is the default, right? So these are the default rules, the default activities, the default network traffic. All of these things would be referred to as the baseline. So when you have an original group policy, that means that whatever modifications were made to a given group's permissions, if you refer to the original default group policy, on Windows it's actually so easy to do this kind of stuff. You drag the group policy, like it's a drag and drop kind of a thing. You drag the group policy and then you drop it on a folder of users or a folder of organizational units as they're referred to. And then that group policy will apply to every single unit inside of the folder that you just dropped it on. And from that moment on, all you need to do is just modify the group policies configurations, and then it'll apply to every single group or organizational unit inside of that folder. So it's very, very, very straightforward, which is why so many companies actually use Windows and Active Directory to manage their user base, because it's pretty straightforward to be able to apply it. You can do the same thing using LDAP in Linux and Unix environments. For example, with Mac OS, they've also tried to make it, and they have made it very user-friendly to be able to manage a lot of different users or a lot of different permissions. When you're dealing with a command line only environment, which is typically what Linux servers are like, where you just have a black screen with just white lines and you're interacting only via the command line. When you have that kind of an environment, it tends to be not as user-friendly because you can't do drag and drop and make modifications quickly. However, you still can make modifications to groups and make adjustments to group permissions. All of those things are still possible. It's just that on Windows, it seems to be a little bit more straightforward. Anyways, so, using baseline configuration monitoring, that is one of the mitigations that you can have against the tampering of the configurations inside of your computer, inside of the network, and the devices that are inside of that network. And this also can kind of go back to that backup that you made. So the backup before the pen test started technically can count as a baseline. So that's the original default settings, the original configurations of that computer. And so once you're done doing that, you can just refer to that as the baseline. Now, when we talk about cybersecurity in general and defensive security, the concept of having backups is very important. Having regular backups is very important, because if somebody breaks into your system, holds you at ransom, and you don't want to pay the ransom, but you want to restore your systems to their state before the hack happened, if you have a recent backup, let's say one that was this morning before that hack happened, or one that was a week ago, assuming that you think that you've been hacked for a week and you want to go back to the state of everything before that happened, that would be what you would use. Is you would use these frequent backups. And then there are the remote backups of really important client files or data that needs to be backed up to a remote data server, that, again, if your local system gets hacked for whatever reason, you can at least recover that data. And a lot of companies have sync features, which is something that is extremely handy, that it just syncs anything that has been modified inside of the file system, inside of the data storage. It just syncs it in real time as those modifications happen. So if anything takes place, as far as a malicious hack is concerned, they can really quickly just refer back to the most recent database backup that's housed on a server in a different state, kind of a thing. And all of that counts towards baseline. When you're looking at getting back to baseline, that's kind of what we're referring to. And then we have the regular audit of system settings for unauthorized changes. And this is something that can be done through AI. It's something that can be done through scripting. It doesn't even have to be through AI. You can actually write relatively simple and straightforward Python scripts or Bash scripts that will just regularly audit the system once every minute, or once every 5 minutes, or every 10 minutes. It'll just audit the system and be like, hey, these are the changes that were just made in the last 5-10 minutes. And it can be overwhelming, because if you have a high traffic system or a high traffic network, it can kind of get crazy. So you want to track the authorized change or unauthorized changes to the most sensitive system files. Maybe you're looking at binaries, maybe you're looking at executable scheduled tasks, maybe services, those types of things that you want to audit to see if there are any unauthorized changes to those. But if it's just like a network share that people are, everybody's sharing files to and they're working on project files, that might be a little bit challenging because it'll create a lot of noise because there will be a lot of changes that have been made. However, when you're modifying it for unauthorized changes, when you're monitoring and auditing it for unauthorized changes, what you can do in that environment is have a list of all of the users that should have access to that network share, have a list of all the IP addresses that should have access to that network share, and then your script can monitor that network share to see if anybody other than those permitted IP addresses and those legitimate users has access to network share. And if somebody other than those permitted people access to network share, that's when the audit system says, hey, you know what? I just noticed something that might be unauthorized. So it will be much less noisy because you have a white list of IP addresses as well as users. And then from there, you can kind of reverse engineer to see when unauthorized changes have been made. Next, you need to remove malicious network configurations. So we modify network settings to maintain access, also known as persistence, and these must be restored to prevent re-entry. This is probably more important than anything else that you would have to restore and get back to the original security configurations, because if you mess with the network configurations to allow for a way in so that you can just do everything you want to do during the pen test and you don't fix it, if somebody notices what you just did, if somebody scans the systems and scans the network and says, oh wow, there's literally a door that's wide open for me, I can just enter, and that was a door that you opened and you forgot to close back up, that will be very bad. Not good, super bad. So you want to go ahead and restore those network settings so that nobody else can actually enter the network. Now, removing malicious proxy settings on Windows can be done with netsh when HTTP reset the proxy, which resets the HTTP proxy settings to default. You can remove the rogue SSH keys on Linux by removing everything that has been inside of the SSH authorized keys. Now, this is actually what's interesting is that this is a hidden folder. So just keep that in mind. Anything that starts with a dot is not going to be available, or it's not going to be visible just by running basic ls commands. So you need to do the lsla to be able to see all of the hidden folders, and presumably you would have done that to actually create the keys so that you can use those SSH keys for secure shell login. So again, you should be notating this. You should be documenting all of these things that you've done so that when you go through cleanup, you can remove all of these things. So removing those logins can be, or excuse me, those keys, I should say, can be as simple as running a simple remove command and then just making sure that you do recursively and actually get rid of everything that is inside of the authorized keys or whatever the folder was that you stored those keys into. So the attacker added SSH keys. You should be removing all of those. And it's important, but this is also something that somebody would get access to once they've actually hacked into a device somewhere, or they would have to have access to this folder to be able to get those SSH keys that we added. So it's not as important as resetting a proxy, for example, or closing off ports that you left open. You used an uncommon port and you got your way in, and then you didn't report that uncommon port, and for whatever reason you didn't delete or close off the connection that you had. So there's an uncommon port that's now on a scan if somebody does nmap, and they can use that as potentially an entry point. So whatever network entrances you've created, whether it's a proxy, whether it's a port that you left open, or whether it's SSH credentials or SSH keys that you created, all of these things need to be wiped and restored to their original default settings. Last but not least, you want to flush the DNS cache entries. So these would be the DNS entries that you added to the cache so that the configurations of the DNS resolves. When you resolve DNS is when an IP address has been added so that it can be connected to it and it's allowed inside of the configurations of the network. So if an IP address has been added, if a domain name has been added, whatever it is that you added to the DNS cache, it needs to be wiped. It needs to be flushed, as the key term here says. So ipconfig flush DNS prevents DNS-based persistence techniques, assuming that you used DNS as a part of your pen test to actually maintain connection to the device, as well as persistence, really. So if you have some kind of a C2 server that's connected because it's now allowed to be connected to, because now that IP address or that domain name is inside of the DNS cache file, and in that regard, you need to wipe it, right? You need to flush it. So you get rid of all of those things and it resets it back to default so that that entry point is not available. That persistence point is not available. The mitigations against network tampering would be to regularly monitor network configurations for unauthorized changes. So again, you have a list of IP addresses that are allowed. You have a list of user accounts that are allowed. You even have a list of times of the day that they're allowed to access it, right? So there are so many different ways that you can really hone in on the allowed list and the configurations of the people that can access the network. And then everything outside of that list technically counts as an unauthorized change. So you have a small list, or relatively quote unquote small list of activities that are allowed by a list of authorized people, and then everything else outside of that list would be counted as unauthorized. So it's a default block, right? It's like a deny all kind of a thing with a handful of people inside of the allowed list. Then we have restricting admin access to DNS firewall and proxy settings. Very, very important series of settings. So the random person, anybody that does not have admin access, should not be able to modify any of these configurations, any of these settings, and it should only be reserved for people that have admin access. If a hacker is able to create a user profile or get access to admin credentials, okay, good on them. They would then be able to mess with these settings. However, no other user should be able to mess with these settings, which means restricting access to those settings to the highest privileged accounts. And we have finally arrived to the practice questions for the last section of this lecture series, which I honestly didn't even think that I would get to. I have to look back to see when I posted the very first pen test video, but it has been over a dozen weeks for sure, because I've been dropping these once a week, and it might be over 20 weeks, honestly. Is however many episodes we have, that's how many weeks that we've been going through. It's probably over 30 now. But this is the last one. This is the last set of practice questions, which is on the cleanup and restoration portion. And then after this, we're going to be going through the exam prep. And then after that, we're going to be going through scripting and actually doing the lab exercises. And those things don't really have practice questions. It's more so about just getting you familiar with the various languages that we're going to be using for scripting and the various lab exercises that we're going to run, so that you can kind of go through the motions of what it's like to do recon, to do vulnerability analysis, etc. So for this section, just like every other section, I have multiple choice, multiple response, and scenario-based questions. And inside of the notes document, there's a bunch of other types of questions as well. Inside of the slideshow here, we're going to have multiple choice, so whether you get one question or one response to a question. Multiple response will have two or more responses, and then scenario-based questions will give you a scenario, and then you got to try to figure out what the answer to that would be. These questions are not going to be the identical questions you're going to find on the examination. I'm really trying to just make sure that you understand the contents of everything that we talked about, and I want to teach you how to approach the questions, how to do the critical thinking, how to actually think about finding the answers to these questions. That's much more important to me, because there are going to be literally hundreds and hundreds of questions that would be available in the pool of questions that they'll create for CompTIA PenTest Plus. And you're not going to be able to remember all of them. You're not going to be able to memorize all of them unless you have like amazing memory. And it's just forbidden. Like, nobody actually has access to those questions. We sign NDAs when we take any CompTIA exam, and that NDA enforces this rule that you're not allowed to share any of these questions outside of the room that you're taking that exam, right? So you're not going to find exact questions, and even if you did, it's going to be very hard to try to memorize all of them. So the best thing you can do is learn how to approach the question and how to do the critical thinking element of the question. I have not seen these questions in advance. When I created this slideshow, I just copy and pasted all of them in here. So I saw them when I initially did it, but I haven't studied them, right? So I don't know every single answer that's going to come up, and I may get some wrong, right? So this is one of those things that I'm trying to display what it would be like if you approach this with a fresh mind and you haven't memorized these things in advance, and I will be talking through my thought process as I try to find the final answer of all of these things. And this is going to be available to you if you join Hackaholics Anonymous as an agent level member and up. And of course, so will the notes, and so will all of the scripts that we're going to create, etc. So this is all available to Hackaholics Anonymous. And I think that's pretty much it for all of the disclosures that I have for these questions. So let's jump into the questions. First one is, which one of the following best describes the goal of cleanup phase after a pen test? So you're looking for the best answer here, which means typically the most obvious answer. That's what I kind of look for when I see something like this. I'm not trying to convince myself of how an answer could be right. I'm looking for the one that's most obviously correct. So to destroy all system logs permanently. Not really. It's probably as part of something that you're going to be doing is to destroy the entries of the system logs, but you're not trying to destroy the logs themselves, and especially permanently. So that's another thing. To remove artifacts, persistence mechanisms, and restore normal system operations, that's the most obvious. I think that's the answer. To leave a subtle backdoor for future testing, that is not a part of cleanup phase. You're trying to actually get rid of all the backdoors. To escalate privilege further, for later stages, you're also not trying to do that. You're trying to remove all of those vectors. So the most obvious answer would be B. What is the most effective way to ensure secure data destruction during post-engagement cleanup? So deleting files with the rm command, moving files to a hidden directory, using secure wiping tools or cryptographic erasure, compressing and encrypting the files. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to ensure secure data destruction, okay? Deleting files with the rm command could technically have them be recovered. Using secure wiping tools or cryptographic erasure sounds really good. It sounds very solid. Moving files to a hidden directory is not deleting them. You're not destroying data in any way. You're just moving them to a hidden directory, which can be found later on. And compressing and encrypting the files is also not deleting them. You're literally compressing and encrypting them. So the thing that makes the most sense would be to use secure wiping tools or cryptographic erasure. Which of the following persistence mechanisms should a pen tester look for when performing cleanup? So which persistence mechanism are you looking for when you're doing cleanup? Network sniffers in promiscuous mode, scheduled task registry run keys and malicious services, firewall misconfigurations, outdated antivirus signatures. So we're looking at persistence mechanisms. Okay, so firewall misconfigurations is not necessarily a persistence mechanism. It could be a defensive configuration that we need to fix, but it's not necessarily a persistence mechanism. It could be, because technically if you misconfigure the firewall, that means one of the IP addresses that should have been blocked is not blocked anymore, and maybe that IP address can actually enter, but it's not really persistence. Outdated antivirus signatures, again, also not persistence, because your antivirus looks through a list of signatures when any file is downloaded, and it says, oh, you know what, this downloaded file signature matches one of the signatures that I have in my database of malicious software, so I'm going to block it. Not really a persistence mechanism right here. Network sniffers in promiscuous mode are not doing persistence. They're just they're doing reconnaissance, and they're doing enumeration most likely. So this is not anything that would fall under persistence. Scheduled tasks, we've used for persistence. Registry keys, we've used for persistence. Malicious services, we have used for persistence. So these are the mechanisms that a pen tester will look for when performing cleanup. During cleanup, why is restoring original configurations important? It ensures the attacker cannot escalate privileges again. Maybe it ensures the system is returned to its pre-test stable and secure state. Most obvious answer. It prevents blue teams from analyzing test results. Not really. It makes persistence easier in the future. Also not really. So we are trying to stop this from happening. So this is like a goal that we don't have in pen testing. We're trying to prevent this from happening. We don't want it. We don't want any of what we did to actually repeat itself in the future. So that's one thing. The second thing is we don't want to prevent the blue team from analyzing the test results. That is also another one of the goals that we have from a pen test. We want them to analyze test results so that they can find out how to fix the infrastructure and how to fix the network and the systems, etc. Ensuring that the attacker cannot escalate privileges again is also not really a big part of restoring original configuration. So the only thing that we're really, like the big thing we're trying to do here is to make sure that the system is returned to its pre-test stable and secure state. That's the big thing for restoring original configurations. What is the biggest risk if a pen tester fails to remove a persistence mechanism after testing? The biggest risk, right? Basically, somebody else can just get in. That's kind of the biggest one, in my opinion. So system reboot will erase it automatically. That's not a biggest risk. That's kind of like an easy fix almost. So that's not even a risk, really. An attacker could later exploit the leftover access point. That's the one. The SOC team won't detect anomalies. Not really the biggest risk. The client's test results will be invalid. Also not the biggest risk. These things can be problems, but it's not the biggest risk. The biggest risk is that somebody else that is a malicious person can actually reuse what you did and get into the system. So that would be B. Which of the following are examples of persistence mechanism that must be removed after a pen test? So select two of them. We pretty much kind of looked at this in a few questions ago. So reverse shell schedule to run at reboot. So it's a schedule right here, right? So it's a scheduled task. And so anytime that the computer is rebooted, it's going to run that scheduled task on startup, and then the reverse shell is going to be established. So that's definitely one. Malicious Windows service created during exploitation. That's another one. Default admin credentials. Default admin credentials can be used to get in, but I wouldn't say they're persistence mechanisms because it's not something that we made. And firewall misconfigurations, another one of those things that I would have to convince myself of these answers. So like A and B stand out very obviously. C and D, I would have to kind of convince myself or debate myself to say, well, technically it can be, whatever. So if you have to say something like technically it can be or technically it might be or whatever, that is kind of like a big hint that this is not the answer you're looking for. You're looking for the one that really stands out. So in this case, it's A and B. Which steps should a pen tester take when performing secure cleanup? So remove backdoors and persistence artifacts, yes. Restore altered configuration files to their original state, yes. Leave hidden accounts for later engagements, no. Transfer sensitive files to a personal archive, also no. So it's interesting. It's like A and B end up being the answers, and this is not going to be the case in an exam. Just so you're aware, there is very much not going to be the case where it's just going to always be A and B or something. But it feels like this is kind of what it's like in these questions that have been created. So just try to look for the obvious answers. This is a pattern that I've noticed, and a few other people have pointed them out too, where it's like, hey, the answer always seems to be B or A or C or something like that. And just I see that, and I am aware of that. I didn't create these questions. I just got them when I went to GPT, and I was like, create questions for me for PenTest Plus. And this is kind of what it did, and I'm just noticing the pattern. So which of the following techniques qualify as secure data destruction? So moving files into the recycle bin is not a secure data destruction. So there you go. A is not the answer here. Overwriting files with multiple pass wiping tools, shred and sdelete. So B is the answer here. Using cryptographic erasure of storage devices, that's also an answer. Compressing files and storing them in temp is not secure data destruction. So it would be B and C in this case. B seems to be like one of the most consistent answers. Okay, so after a pen test, the red team discovers that they left behind a reverse shell scheduled as a cron job on a Linux server. So this was a scheduled task that they did not wipe. Which cleanup step is most appropriate? Ignore it. That is not the answer. I don't need to read the rest. Ignore it is not the answer. Since cron jobs disappear after reboot, that is not true. So remove the cron job entry and verify no other persistence remains. So B. B is the answer. Leave the cron job for blue team detection practice. No. Rename the cron job to hide it better. Also no. So the question is, which cleanup step is most appropriate? You're doing cleanup here, right? So the most appropriate cleanup is to remove it and verify that no other persistence remains. Pentester deletes a sensitive document containing test credentials. So they delete a sensitive document containing test credentials by moving it to the recycle bin. Later, the client's forensic team recovered the document. Which steps should have been taken? So they should have also deleted it from the recycle bin so that it's not recoverable, right? So use compression and renaming before deletion? No. Use secure wiping or cryptographic erasure? It's kind of annoying that B is always the answer. Modified NTFS permissions to hide it? No. Relocate it to dev null? No. So B is the answer here. Now here's a very, very important piece right here, okay? So relocating something to dev null may actually delete it, because remember we did the cat of dev null and then we transferred the contents to a different file. That could actually be one of those things that could work. However, dev null is specific to Linux and Unix. And when you talk about the recycle bin, this is more about the Windows environment. So when you hear recycle bin, think Windows environment. In the Mac OS, it's called trash, and I want to say in Linux it's also called the bin, maybe in Linux, but it's not the recycle bin. So recycle bin is very specific to Windows, so just keep that in mind, because technically dev null is a Linux Unix type of syntax, and it implies Linux Unix. In this particular case, we're talking about Windows. During testing, registry keys and Windows services were altered to enable persistence. At cleanup, the tester restores registry entries to default values, removes malicious services, and validates system boot behavior. Which cleanup principle is being applied here? Data exfiltration, secure data destruction, restoring original system configs, and privilege escalation. So they are not covertly exfiltrating data. This is a part of the exercise when you're actually still inside of your pen test. This is a part of post-exploitation. This has nothing to do with cleanup here. Secure data destruction is a good part of restoration. However, they are not doing that. They're restoring registry entries and removing services and validating boot behavior. So they're more actually restoring original system configurations than anything. So thankfully it wasn't B that was the answer, but it's C, I guess. Next, an organization discovers a pen tester forgot to clean up an Empire C2 agent running on a compromised workstation. Weeks later, an attacker hijacks the leftover agent to re-enter the environment. What failure in cleanup caused this incident? Oof. Secure wiping was skipped. Persistence mechanism removal was incomplete. That is definitely the answer. Frickin' B. Original configuration was not restored. Reporting requirements were ignored. So this is definitely an answer, right? So they didn't report that there was an Empire C2 that I guess somebody else could have probably taken care of, right? Or maybe they did report it, but the blue team didn't review it step by step, so maybe they missed it. Original configuration was not restored. This is technically not a configuration issue right here. This is a command and control server, or Empire, the framework itself, is used to establish command and control connections. So this is not necessarily a configuration issue. And secure wiping is also not a configuration issue, because when you have a command and control connection, you don't need to wipe anything, because that connection needs to be brought down. We need to crash that initial established connection from Empire, excuse me. And that won't change really if you wipe the system, because it could still connect back to an IP address or something like that was originally running on that Empire C2 agent, running on a compromised workstation. So I guess technically if you do secure wiping, you would get rid of the agent. So maybe that could be an answer. But in my opinion, I think the answer is, of course, B, as always. So persistence mechanism removal was incomplete. I don't like the fact that the answer is B all the time. That's kind of pissing me off. But whatever, hopefully you just understood the thought process behind finding those answers. And that was it for our practice questions. There are many more practice questions inside of the notes document, so I just want to keep that in mind. I want to remind you of that. So if you do join Hackaholics Anonymous as an agent, you get many more practice questions inside of the actual notes document that I use for the lecture, as well as the slideshow questions that are here. It's just the formatting of the rest of the questions makes it really hard to transfer them to a slideshow. So I just left them in the notes document for you. The closing module will be the next episode, and that's for just kind of giving you some best practices for the exam and how you can prep for that exam. And then inside of that module, it'll be through separate videos, because the lab exercises themselves will end up being much longer than any of these lectures, because usually lab exercises involve the creation of scripts and running exercises and doing a bunch of trial and error. And I want you to learn from the trial and error, so I'm not going to cut out any of the trial and error. And typically what happens when you do stuff like that, you have much longer videos. So this video that I'm recording right now currently is running at 1 hour 18 minutes right now. And once I cut out a few of the lulls and some of the empty spaces, it'll probably be the upload will probably be anywhere from 1 hour 15 minutes to 1 hour 17, something like that, right? So this is what the lecture portions are like. However, when we actually get into the labs, they're going to be much longer form videos, and you're going to get a lot more out of those. And that's one of the big things that I've been really excited about in this entire series, is to get to those pen testing labs and those exercises. So super excited to share those with you, and those will all be starting as of the next video, the next episode. And if you want to get notified of that, please make sure that you like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified when those videos drop. And I mean, if you were watching this video 6 months from now, then all of the videos are already out, so you don't have to get notified of that. But there's other videos that are going to be coming out that you will be notified of. So if you subscribe and turn on that notification bell, you will definitely be notified of that. And of course, you can get access to this slideshow, as well as the lecture notes document, as well as once I create all of the scripts, they're going to be available to you. You can literally just reuse the scripts for your own purposes, and everything else that goes along with those labs and those exercises. All of these things can be available to you by joining Hackaholics Anonymous as an agent level member or above. And the note for that is going to come up in a few seconds. If you have any questions for me for everything that we talked about today, or any of the other videos that we've talked about, please drop your questions in the comment section below. And apart from that, love, peace, and chicken grease. If no one else loves you, Hank loves you. And I will see you in the next video later. To get the PenTest Plus notes, practice questions, and to join a supportive community of like-minded people like you, consider joining the Hackaholics Anonymous membership community. We have 4 tiers: the supporter, the agent, the guardian, and the master. And each tier gets their own Discord server and early access to content. The agent, guardian, and master levels will get exclusive content like line-by-line code explanations for how to create cybersecurity and PenTest Plus scripts, like exclusive downloads that they will get. For example, the notes document for this PenTest Plus and everything that I'm using for the lectures, as well as all of the practice questions and everything else that will go along that will be made for the scripts and everything else that we're going to be doing for the PenTest Plus training series. There will be free pre-made monthly Python automations that have to do with system administration, cybersecurity defense, as well as, of course, PenTest Plus and ethical hacking. And then there's going to be monthly live streams with me every single month, plus so many other things that you would get as a part of being a member of Hackaholics Anonymous in these tiers. To join, you can simply click the link in the description below, or you can go to our homepage and click the join button there, or you can go to youtube.com/@HankHacksHackers/join, and you'll be able to join Hackaholics Anonymous.